Let me ask you about something. Have you noticed how the internet feels different lately? Not louder, not angrier, just tighter. Feels like every space is watching you. Every opinion comes with rules. Every post feels like it's asking you to pick a side, even when you didn't come there to fight. And if you spend enough time online, especially in those spaces that are supposed to feel supportive or safe, you'll start to notice something else too. The conversation slowly stops being conversations. They turn into scripts, into approved phrases, into invisible lines that are not supposed to be crossed. I'm not talking about bad people. I'm talking about good intentions inside a system that rewards certainty, outrage, and belonging, and quietly punishes curiosity. This video isn't about blame. It's about noticing a pattern that almost no one wants to name, and why it's happening right in front of us. For a long time, the internet had a very obvious face. It was loud. It sat at a desk. It argued in comment sections. It lived in forums, streams, and multiplayer chats. You could see it, hear it, mute it, close the tab. That version of the internet felt aggressive, but also distant. You logged on, you logged off. It stayed in a place. But that's not how most people access the internet anymore. Now it lives in your pocket. It shows up when you wake up, when you're bored, when you're lonely, when you're scrolling without even knowing why. And this version is quiet. No yelling, no obvious hostility, just endless feeds of stories, warnings, affirmations, advice, moral framing, all delivered softly, personally, and consistently. This isn't a men versus women thing, it's an interface thing, because the internet became ambient, always present, always listening. It stopped rewarding dominance and started rewarding emotional resonance. And that matters, because women statistically spend more time in rational spaces online, spaces about identity, safety, well-being, justice, healing, and community. Not because they're weak, but because those spaces promise something real: understanding, protection, and meaning. The problem is, those spaces are the easiest places for ideas to harden, not through shouting, through repetition, through validation, and through the slow replacement of curiosity with certainty. When every post feels personal, when every disagreement feels dangerous, when belonging starts to depend on saying the right things, that's not just influence anymore. That's how people quietly, gradually, and without even realizing, become radicalized. I'll make this personal for a second. When I was dating, I was very aware that I'm not perfect. I don't pretend to be, but I've noticed something strange happening more and more. It feels like I'm being evaluated consistently, not as a person, but as a risk profile. Every story I tell, every opinion, every joke, there's this quiet scanning happening in the background. Like the goal isn't to get to know me, but to catch red flags before they reveal itself. And over time, that changes how you show up. You stop being honest or relaxed, you just start performing. I've caught myself doing it, trying to sound flawless, emotionally calibrated, always saying the right thing. Not because I want to deceive anyone, but because one wrong sentence feels like it could end everything. It starts feeling less like two people exploring each other and more like a jester trying to entertain a queen. Hoping you don't slip, hoping you don't disappoint, hoping you don't say something that disqualifies you. And here's the uncomfortable part. That pressure doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from an online environment that teaches people to look for danger first, to assume harm before curiosity, to treat relationships like threat detections instead of discovery. Again, this isn't about women being bad or men being victims. This is about what happens when the internet trains people over years to see the world through the worst case scenarios. When you live inside the mindset long enough, it doesn't feel extreme. It feels responsible, smart, and safe. But that's exactly how radicalization works, not through hatred or yelling, but through fear, certainty, and the quiet belief that vigilance is the same thing as wisdom. And the part that doesn't get talked about enough is how this hurts women too. Because living in a consistent state of evaluation is exhausting, no matter which side you're on. You're taught to scan every interaction for danger, you don't get peace, you get hypervigilance. You start second-guessing people before they've even shown who they are. You start carrying the emotional weight of being on guard all the time, and over time, that doesn't feel empowering, it feels heavy. What begins as self-protection slowly turns into isolation. Because the internet doesn't just warn you once, it reminds you every day. Every story reinforces the same message. Be careful, be alert, trust yourself, but only the version of yourself that's suspicious. And here's where the recursion starts. Women enter online spaces looking for support, validation, and safety. Those spaces reward shared experiences, especially painful ones. Pain gets amplified, warnings get shared, edge cases get treated like norm. The more extreme the story, the more engagement it gets. The more engagement it gets, the more it spreads, and the more it spreads, the more it feels representative of reality. So the space slowly shifts. From healing to vengeance, from awareness to suspicion, from community to ideological filtering. And once that shift happens, that space starts policing itself. People who question the tone get labeled naive. People who suggest nuance get treated unsafe. Curiosity becomes a liability. That's the loop. Fear creates certainty, certainty creates belonging, belonging reinforces fear. And because it's wrapped up in this language of care, safety, and environment, it doesn't feel like extremism. It feels like growth. But a worldwide view leaves no room for error, no room for forgiveness, and no room for people to be unfinished. That's not protection anymore, that's radicalization. There's something else happening here that's easy to miss. The loud internet used to argue with you. The quiet internet doesn't. It frames things for you. Instead of telling you what to think, it tells you what kind of person you are for thinking it. It doesn't say, here's an opinion. It says, here's what a good person notices. Here's what a safe person avoids. Here's what an aware person already knows. And that's a completely different kind of influence, because now the disagreement doesn't feel like a disagreement, it feels like a self-betrayal. You're not pushing back against an idea, you're questioning your own instincts, your own values for your own safety. That's especially powerful in spaces built around care, healing, and protection, because when something is framed as harm prevention, opting out feels irresistible. Over time, the line between information and identity disappears. You're no longer asking, is this true? You're asking, why does believing this say about me? And once the belief becomes identity, change feels like loss. Loss of a community, safety, and moral ground. So people double down. Not because they're stubborn, but because the cost of letting go feels too high. This is where the quiet internet becomes dangerous. Not because it lies outright, but because it selectively reinforces. It shows you the same kind of story again and again, the same warnings, failures, and villains, not enough to shock you and just enough to normalize a worldview. And slowly your senses of proportion shift. Rare events start to feel common, edge cases start to feel inevitable, and caution turns into expectation. That's how fear stops feeling like fear and starts feeling like realism. And once fear wears the mask of wisdom, it's almost impossible to argue against, because who wants to be the person who wasn't careful enough? And that's when the loop tightens. If any of this feels uncomfortable to hear, that's not a coincidence. Discomfort is usually the first signal that something familiar is being questioned. Not something is evil or stupid or familiar, but because most people didn't enter these spaces to become hardened or suspicious. They entered because they were trying to be thoughtful, careful, or kind. That's what makes this so hard to talk about. The same traits that make someone compassionate is also making them vulnerable to emotional framing. The internet doesn't exploit hatred nearly as well as it exploits care. And once you see that, a lot of things start to make sense. I want to be very clear about something before I go any further. This video isn't me pretending I know how to fix men or women, dating, or the internet. I don't. This is for one person at a time. For anyone who feels stuck inside a loop and wants an out. And no, I'm not going to tell you to just log off. That advice sounds good, but it's mostly bullshit, because breaking recursive loops doesn't happen by avoidance. It happens through effort. The uncomfortable truth is nothing changes without awareness. Humans don't influence behavior by force, we influence it by seeing patterns clearly enough that they loosen their grip. And yes, even saying that sounds recursive. If I tell you to observe your thoughts online, you could just end up consuming more content, more takes, more opinions, and get pulled even deeper. So the method matters more than the instruction. Here's the part that nobody explains. The way out isn't more analysis, it isn't better arguments, it isn't finding the right side. The way out is silence. Not silence as in ignorance, but silence as in non-reaction. When you consume content, something happens immediately. An emotion fires first. Anger, fear, validation, disgust, righteousness. That emotion spike is the hook. The quiet internet is built to target people who are emotionally sensitive. Not weak, not stupid, just human. So the counter isn't confrontation, the counter is you observe the content, you notice the emotional triggers, and then you refuse to act on it. No comment, no like, no share, no internal speech rehearsing what you'd say, just stillness. And then, the key part, you let the emotion pass without feeding it. At first you feel like you're doing nothing, but you're actually breaking the loop. Because radicalization feeds on engagement, on reaction, on emotional reinforcement. Silence, however, starves it. Over time, something subtle happens. You start to notice patterns instead of messages. You see how often fear is used, and certainty is rewarded. You start to notice patterns instead of messages. You see how often fear is used, how certainty is rewarded, how belonging is offered in exchange for agreement. And once you see the pattern without emotionally entertaining it, it loses its power. From there, the steps are simple, but not easy, just simple. Step 1, consume slower than the algorithm expects. Step 2, feel the emotion fully without narrating it. Step 3, don't convert emotions into identity. And step 4, choose curiosity after calm, not before it. Afterwards, you can re-enter conversations only when you're no longer trying to win, warn, or prove. This isn't about becoming neutral, it's about becoming unhookable. Because the most radical thing you can do in a system built on reaction is to see it clearly and remain silent long enough to choose your response. That is how you break the loop. Now, I don't want this video to be any longer than it already is, so let me know if you guys would want more content on this. I could perhaps show you guys a more detailed way of how to break this loop. And I'm very interested in topics like these and psychology of people, especially that are all on the internet. So definitely would love if you guys like and subscribe. This is one of my first videos on this topic, and I would be incredibly motivated to do more if you guys would like. Thank you for watching this video, and have a nice day.